The rain fell in steady, silent sheets that day, as if the sky itself was mourning her. I stood under a black umbrella at the edge of the cemetery, staring at the polished wooden casket lowered into the ground. My mother. Gone. After years of quiet distance, hospital rooms that smelled of antiseptic and unspoken words, she had finally slipped away at 63. I was 32, and I still didn't know how to feel about it. The service had been small, a handful of distant cousins, a few old neighbors, and the priest who kept calling her a woman of quiet strength. I wondered if any of them had really known her. I certainly hadn't. Not the way a son should know his mother. She had raised me alone after my father disappeared when I was 10, working 2 jobs, keeping the house spotless, and speaking in short, careful sentences that never quite reached her eyes. Love was there, I think. But it always felt locked away, like something fragile she was afraid to let breathe. As the last mourners drifted toward their cars, I lingered by the grave, the wet earth soaking into my shoes. That's when I saw her, an older woman, maybe in her late 70s, standing a respectful distance away. She wore a simple gray coat and held no umbrella, letting the rain streak down her face like tears she refused to wipe away. I didn't recognize her. She approached slowly, her steps measured, as if every movement had been rehearsed for years. She stopped in front of me and reached into her coat pocket. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out a small brass key attached to a faded red ribbon. Without a word, she placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. The metal was warm from her touch. "Your mother asked me to give this to you," she said, her voice soft but steady, carrying the faint accent of someone who had traveled far. "She hid it for 22 years. She said you would know what to do when the time came. Open it alone. And when you do, try to forgive her." Before I could ask her name, or how she knew my mother, or what any of this meant, she turned and walked away, disappearing between the rows of headstones like a ghost the rain had summoned. I stood there frozen, the key growing heavier in my hand with every passing second. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with the key in front of me. 22 years. That took me back to when I was 10, the year my father left. The year my mother started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. The year our house began to feel like a museum of things we never talked about. I turned the key over and over, searching for markings, but there were none. Just an ordinary key that somehow carried the weight of my entire childhood. I barely slept. The next morning, I drove to my mother's old house, the one I had sold 6 months earlier after she moved into hospice. The new owners were kind enough to let me look around when I explained. The attic was exactly as I remembered: dusty boxes, old furniture covered in sheets, the faint smell of lavender that always clung to my mother's things. I searched for nearly an hour before I found it, a small, locked metal box tucked behind a loose panel in the wall, exactly where the key fit, with a soft click. Inside were 3 items: a thick bundle of letters tied with string, a faded photograph, and a small silver locket I had never seen her wear. My hands shook as I opened the first letter. It was dated 22 years ago, addressed to me. "Dear Elias," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I owe you the truth I was too afraid to tell you while I was alive." I sat down on the dusty floor, the rain pattering against the roof above me, and read every word. The letters told a story I never could have imagined. My father hadn't abandoned us. He had been dying. A rare heart condition diagnosed right after my 10th birthday. He wanted to spare me the pain of watching him fade, so he left quietly, checking into a hospital in another state under a different name. My mother had known everything. She had visited him in secret for months, holding his hand as he grew weaker, lying to me every single night about where she went. But the real secret was deeper. In the final letters, she explained why she had been so distant with me. 2 weeks before my father died, she had discovered she was pregnant again. A little girl. My sister. The pregnancy had been high risk because of the stress. And in the end, she lost the baby at 6 months. She buried that loss alone, never telling me, because she couldn't bear to add more pain to my life. Instead, she poured everything into raising me, but the grief had built walls around her heart that she never learned how to tear down. The photograph was of my father, holding a tiny ultrasound image, smiling through obvious pain. The locket contained a lock of fine dark hair, my sister's. I cried there in that attic for what felt like hours. All those silent dinners. All those times she turned away when I asked about Dad. All those nights I heard her crying through the wall and thought she just didn't love me enough. She had been carrying 2 coffins inside her chest for 22 years, and she had done it so I wouldn't have to carry even one. The last letter was shorter. It was written just months before she passed. I know I wasn't the mother you deserved, Elias. I was broken in ways I didn't know how to fix. But every time I looked at you, I saw the best parts of your father and the hope I lost with your sister. You were my reason to keep going. The stranger giving you this key is Margaret, your father's sister. She was the only one who knew the full truth. I made her promise to wait until I was gone. I was too much of a coward to face your eyes while I was still breathing. Forgive me, my son. Not for my secrets, but for the love I never knew how to show you properly. You were always enough. I was the one who wasn't. I drove back home that evening with the letters on the passenger seat. The rain had finally stopped, and a pale sunset broke through the clouds. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe in the same house my mother had once lived in. A few weeks later, I met Margaret properly. She told me stories about my father that made me laugh and cry at the same time. She showed me pictures of the sister I never got to meet. And slowly, piece by piece, I started rebuilding the image of my mother. Not as the cold, distant woman I had resented, but as a woman who had loved so fiercely that it destroyed parts of her. I still have the key. I keep it on a chain around my neck now, not because I need to open any more boxes, but because it reminds me that some things are worth hiding until the heart is ready to hold them. My mother didn't leave me a fortune or a perfect past. She left me the truth, and in the end, that was the greatest gift she could have given. If you're watching this and you've lost someone who felt like a mystery, I hope this story finds you at the right time. Sometimes the people we think we knew the least are the ones who loved us the most quietly. And sometimes a single key is all it takes to finally unlock the door between who they were and who we needed them to be.